she is the hero of her story. And I think she now sees it. And I think she also sees that she's giving voice to the millions of women, young girls that were forced to relinquish their children under societal pressure. They were shamed. They were told, your baby deserves a family. You are not deserving of raising this child. And I think for my mom to put a stake in the ground and say, I did not like what they did to us, and to put a stake in the ground and to say it was wrong, and to do that on behalf of a lot of women who have never told their story, I think she likes that. And I like it for her. And I like how empowered she feels now, when I think many times in her life she was powerless.
2, 1, 0.
Hi, and welcome to Stellar Life Podcast. This is your host, Orion. Today I have with me Jennifer Griffith. She's a mother, author, and podcast host. In her writing, she explores the complexities of motherhood and the extraordinary moment that shapes our lives. Her lived experience with generational trauma inspired her first book, Both Sides of Then, Finding Love After Abandonment, which honors the power of the female voice even after it's been silenced. So her story is extraordinary, super fascinating. We also talked about the parallel we can find between the story of our life and the story of our mother's life. We talked about healing, and healing not just for us, but healing generational trauma. We dove into imperfect parenting and how it's okay to be perfectly imperfect and more. And now, without further ado, on to the show. Hey, Jennifer, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here. I am looking forward to hearing your miraculous story.
Thank you for having me. I am thrilled to be here.
So before we begin, maybe you can share a little bit about yourself and about your book.
Yes, my book is Both Sides of Then. It is the story of my mother's life being raised in an orphanage in Philadelphia, and then being forced to surrender her firstborn, my brother, for adoption in the decades before Roe, and the impact that those experiences had on the mother she was to me. I am a recovering technology sales leader, so I spent a lot of time in technology, almost 20 years, but I had always wanted to write. And I had a calling when my father passed away 9 years ago. When I was with him as he was crossing over, I realized how quickly life went. One of the things that he said to me a couple of days before he died was, it just went so fast. And so that really sunk in. My son was 4 at the time, and as my father passed away. And I just realized that I was trying to do it all, but not doing the thing that I knew I wanted to do in life. I knew that on my deathbed, I wanted to say that I wrote a book. And so when he passed away, I left my tech career to be with my son and to pursue my passion of writing. And that is when my writing journey truly began. And it took me 5 years to write my story. And originally I had a coach, and I said, I want to write, but I don't know what this book is about. And she said to me, step out of the way. Just get out of the way and see what comes. And so when I did that, the voice that was coming to me was my mom as a young girl. And I always knew that my mother had this captivating, alluring story because of the photos that she had framed on her dresser. She had a photo of the orphanage that she was raised in. She had a photo of her parents together. And, she would say to me, that's the only picture I have of my parents.
Wow.
And I just knew something about her story was living inside of me. And that for many reasons, my mother was not going to be able to write her story, even though throughout my life, I was the young girl where my mom would play the piano, or she would say a little bit about her childhood and the room would freeze. And everybody would say, you need to write a book. And for many reasons, I knew that my mother could not do that. And that when I stepped out of the way, it was my mom's story that was coming through me in first person. So I originally wrote her story in first person and had my voice bookending it. And that means I was introducing why I was writing my mother's story, and I was closing out on the impact that her story had on the mother that she was to me. And an editor said to me, it's good, but it's very sad. My mom's story is very tragic and very sad. It's very cinematic and Dickens-like. And she, right? And she said, the editor said to me, I wanted more of your story. And one of the reasons that I'm sharing that moment is because I sat there for a long time and I said, no, it's not. I don't have a story to tell. My mom's story is the one. What do you mean you want more of my story? I'm just a girl trying to make it in the world, right? Just trying to live in San Francisco and pay my rent and make friends and hopefully get married. And she said, no, it's your everyday story that I think is really going to resonate with people. And that's where I tapped into this larger thing that our mother's story is so deeply connected to our own. And that when I wrote my mother's story first, I was actually putting together the pieces of my life, which inspired me to start my podcast about your mother, where your story begins, but also inspired me to write the book the way that I did, that I go back and forth between our stories, mother and daughter, in first person. And the miraculous thing happens is that while my mother's story looks so incredibly different from my story on the outside, they are deeply connected. Wow. And that when I wrote her story, then mine, what I put together is a link that trauma unaddressed is trauma transferred, that my mother's trauma became my trauma as a young girl, and that the way that I needed to process it and to put it in its place, let's say, was to write this book.
Wow. And so when did you discover you had a brother?
Yes, I was 13 years old, and it was around Christmas time. And my mother sat me down in the living room. And at this point, I am my mother and my father's only child. My dad had been married before and had two girls that lived on my two sisters that lived on the East Coast with their mom, and we were on the West Coast at this time. And my mom sat me down and she said, "What would you think if you had a brother?" And I looked at her at 13, full of sass and bad makeup and bad hairdo. and I said, "You're pregnant? Gross." And she said, "No." Imagine me, 13, you're in a special place in life. And so my mom hits me with this bomb and she says, "What would you think if you had a brother?" And I looked at her, and again, I think, "Oh, you're pregnant? This can't be." And she said, No, I just found him." And it hit me. How do you lose a child? And how did my mother, who lived solely to be my mother and who was a wonderful mother and so there to be for me, how was it that her firstborn was given away? And that began a more general understanding at a very young age, is that my mother was a woman with a story. Mm. And she was no longer just my mom. She was a woman with a story. And then, and this is chapter 1, so I'm not giving the book away. And then on the heels of that, my father came home months later and said he no longer wanted to be part of the family. And he said, "I don't want to be here anymore," very simply. And so as a young girl on my way to discovering who I am, my parents leave. Symbolically, they are emotionally no longer present in my house. And that led to a very long unraveling of who I was. I was no longer secure in myself, and I was pursuing perfectionism and anything that could give me some sense of control in my environment. And so my adolescence got turned inside out and upside down. And I felt the effects of that. And that is a lot of what my story is how those two moments undid my life and undid my sense of self, and the way that I found self-acceptance and love after going through that as a young girl.
So what was the difference in your personality before those two events happened? Before your dad left, before your mom told you, "Hey, you got a brother and I found him," and I believe she was like all of a sudden really focused on him. Did you meet him? Like, what was it like?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's a really brilliant question. What was I like? Because I did lose myself after that because of my parents' transitions into their own worlds, let's say. Life as I knew it was no longer going to be the same. So to first answer your question, my brother showed up a month later. My mother had found him. And he was 18 years old, which allowed her to identify who he was. And he showed up a month later. And he's wonderful. And he's had a wonderful life. And he's an incredible human being. He was raised by a wonderful family. He's an out of this world father. And so we have been in each other's lives since that moment. And, obviously it's had different transitions as we have grown up. And I think the closeness that we felt back then when he first came into the family has evolved as he raises his own family. But to answer your question on how those two things changed who I was, I had always known something was wrong, if that makes sense. As a young girl, kids are so smart. I knew that something was wrong in my family leading up to that. But when you're young, you can't articulate it. You're not the adult in the room. And I knew my mom was different than other moms. And I will say, in researching this book and interviewing lots of women who went through what my mom did in the era before Roe, a lot of their kids say the same thing. I knew my mom was different because she was living with a ghost. While my mom was taking care of me, she was waking up every day wondering where her son was. Was he alive? Was he happy? And now as a mom myself, I put myself in her shoes, and no wonder she was different than other moms. She was wrestling with this larger question in her life that gripped her soul about her son that she had surrendered under societal pressure. And so while that moment was with my mom was revealing and things started to come together, I no longer understood. I felt, I would say, somewhat rudderless. I had my interests at the time. I was into the clarinet and music and my friends and gymnastics. And it's almost as if everything in my house after that went quiet and that I became quiet and I internalized everything that my parents were going through. I internalized that, but not in a healthy way. Because imagine your brother showing up a month later and we never talked about what happened. Never. And my father announced he wanted to leave, and then it was never spoken of again because he ended up staying until I went to college.
Oh, he ended up staying. Wow. Okay.
He ended up staying. And I think what happened to me, how I was different before and then after, is that I became silent. And silence is linked to shame. And shame can do a number on people if you don't address it or talk about it.
You took on, like, I'm the reason they did it, or I'm the reason they are acting this way. What was the shame about?
Yeah, I think from my mother's perspective, I realized as a young girl, oh, no wonder I was never enough.
Oh,
right? No wonder I could never be enough. She had lost a child. I was one of two. And I was there every day, but I was never going to fill that hole in her heart.
So you're half as important now, all of a sudden.
I'm half as important. I'm not saying it's rational or sane or,
Absolutely.
or healthy to think that way. But as an adolescent going through my own identity issues, that certainly was the way that I swallowed it, especially because then we didn't talk about it. And then for my father wanting to leave, that's where I think the perfectionism came in. And I thought, well, if I was just a good kid, if I was perfect and I did things the way that they wanted, maybe their marriage wouldn't be in the state that it's in.
It's terrible how kids take on their parents' mistakes. It's awful.
Isn't it? And and there's a saying out there that we are the product of our parents' unresolved issues. And so one of the things that I really focused on in this book was showing people how I processed these two traumatic events in a way that it no longer consumed me, but it was a tool, because I do think trauma of any kind can be about transformation, and that your breakdowns are your breakthroughs in many ways. And the way that you get through those things is that you face them, which is what, to my earlier point, my parents were not going to do. We were not going to talk about why my mother had to relinquish a child and why my father wanted to leave. These conversations didn't happen until I was in my 40s.
So when you layer the stories, your story, your mom's story, what are some major points or similarities that you were not aware of?
So many. And it took me writing it. I could not believe that there were parallels in our stories. My mom had two parents who died tragically, and she was placed in an orphanage. I lived in a home with a mom and a dad and a cat and a dog. How could my life be similar? But what was similar is that I lived in a somewhat of an emotional orphanage
Wow.
because my mother was so detached from the things that she had to go through. And in many ways, she was silenced throughout her entire life. So when she was in the orphanage, they would tell her, forget what happened, just move forward with your life. And at the time, as sad as it is, they would tell her and the women in the home, you want to find a good man and get married and have babies. That's your life aspirations. And so in many ways, my mom, when her parents died, was told, move on from it, put one foot in front of the other and move on. Similarly, when she was unwed and pregnant, and at the time society shunned these young mothers, when she went away to the Florence Crittenton home, which is a maternity home where the girls would give up their babies, they told my mom again, forget what happened to you. And so throughout her life, she was told to swallow that shame. And shame is a silencer of the greatest kind and can be rather dangerous. And so for me, what I have learned is that until you break the cycle of the pain or the trauma that lives in your family, it is going to carry on. But it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. Trauma can transform you. It can elevate your life. It can put you in a more accepting place. And for me, while bad things happened, and there's varying degrees of trauma, right? Mine is, I don't know, middle grade, but there's extreme trauma out there. But because bad things happened in my life and I was able to process them, it's almost like it's transformed into something different. It's now a tool. It's a tool that I can have conversations with someone like you about. It's a tool now that I have conversations with other people about the impact their mother's life had on the way that they were raised and the mother that they are today. And so I really was going out and eager to break the cycle that I saw in my family that I was so acutely aware of as a teenager. And then as an adult looking back, recognize, the impact that had on the trajectory of my life. I had a lot of things that I had to get over in order to accept what happened to me then.
Yeah, I see, just listening to your story, of course, we listen to other people's stories and we start thinking about our story. And I do see some parallels, definitely some major parallels in my mom's life and my life. And I think like I'm the one who's breaking the chain right now. Like I did a lot of work, a lot of work on myself, tons of seminars worldwide. I'm still at it, right?
Oh, forever.
Yeah. But I feel like I healed a lot. And with epigenetics, we inherit some things for 8 generations. And when you heal for not only for the people that came before you, but also for the other moms that are going to come in the future. Because this is already like something that is healed in their DNA. And you build this new belief. You build this new code in the DNA because you were doing the healing. So your son's life and your grandson's life, they're going to be completely different. They're going to have more opportunity and they're going to have their own correction, soul correction, obviously, but at least some of it, you already healed.
Yeah, you do. When I became a mother myself, I realized the stakes became a lot higher. I realized that all those things that I went through with my parents were going to impact the way that I raised my son. And I quite frankly didn't like a lot of it. I said, wait a minute, these things feel really big to me. And I'm going to try and clear the plate as much as I can for him so that, to your point, so that he can level up from the place that I came from. And I think I struggle with it every day on, I trigger, I don't love that word, but it's the best one I can think of in the moment. But there's certainly times
I'm so triggered. Yeah, I know.
I know trigger. It's so triggering. And there's so many times when I'm parenting my son that I know I'm coming from an emotional place, a deficit in what I experienced when I was younger, and what good or bad. But I do want to be conscious of it. And I think that's the thing that we're really all trying to aim for, right? Is to be very conscious of the things that we're carrying, good and bad. And one of the reasons that I wanted to title my book Both Sides is because, look, there is light and dark in all of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's how we learn to dance with it and accept it and use it that really matters. And I think in our society, we are so focused on the way things look and that they have to be a certain way. And man, we do a number on ourselves when we do that, don't we? that, things aren't perfect, and love is not perfect. Families are not perfect. And I think the more that we become accepting of that, and that it's the ascent in our life that matters, not the view from the top, that's when we get into the real magic. And to your point, what I love about what I'm doing is that people start to see similarities in their own story, like you shared.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where we create community and connection. And that's what I'm really interested in about. I'm interested in how we share our narratives in a way. I'm not suggesting everybody needs to write a memoir the way that I did. Not everybody needs to put their stuff in the street, I call it, for everybody to devour. But what I do love is this connection, even that you and I have now, about epigenetics and how trauma is transferred through generations and the impact it has on the way that we mother and love.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's like the magic of life. That's just my jam. I love that. And because I think it creates the closeness that we're all so eager to have,
Mm-hmm.
and to know that we're not alone in any of this. We're all going through some similar things. And obviously there are things in the world that seem unsolvable at the moment. But the more that we create community and connection, I think the better off we're all going to be.
Yes. What do you think your son is thinking about this whole journey you're going through with his grandma and then the story, and he's like, what's going on?
He's like, why is my mommy grumpy some days when she's writing? And why is she really grumpy when she doesn't write? Yeah, living with a writer, I don't recommend it for many people. It can be a little bit of an emotional roller coaster.
I think every woman is emotional. Like, I think as women, our strength is our emotion. Our intuition is connected to our emotions. We are like, our senses is our strong suit. And when people say, oh, you're too emotional, I'm like, well, thank you. I feel everything. I'm a woman. It's a part of my being. It's okay. That's why I'm here. Of course, we need to know how to ride the waves, but, and train ourselves, whatever. But emotions are good, and it's fine, and it's healthy.
It is. And to the earlier point of what my house was like, it was so quiet and emotionless, meaning none of the emotions were on the surface. They were all within inside all of us. And man, was that a recipe for disaster. I mean, that was toxic. And I think in many ways, my mother and my father were detached from the reality that they were still, in a house, married with me as a child. They were detached from that at that point. And that was really dangerous. And had a material impact on all of us. But I think for my son, one of the lines I put in my book is that he can now see the emotional ink that is in my veins. And what I really hope from the book is that he understands me as a mom a lot better, my strengths and weaknesses, but also the incredible maternal lineage that was before him and the things that they survived. My mother has told him he can't read the book yet.
Okay.
Yeah. And he's like, and he's upset because he says, it's dedicated to me. Why can't I read the book yet?
I can understand why she's protecting him. I can understand. He's so young. He's only 14. I know 14, they think they're adults, but they're not yet. No.
Oh, yeah. And then, Orion, what the amazing thing is, this book came out. I'm writing about my life when I was my son's age. And how amazing is this? My book comes out. I'm writing about my 14-year-old self, basically, and how I launched from that time and became the woman I am today. And he's my age. And when it came out and I made that connection, I looked at him and I thought, oh my gosh, he's so young. So I get why my mom doesn't want him to read some of it yet. And certainly there's some parts in there about my story. I'm like, oh, we can wait on you knowing about those things.
Yeah. No, and I get it. Sometimes I have conversations. I have a very intelligent young boy, and he's 5. We have conversations, and sometimes I forget he's 5. I forget he's 5. It's like I'm like, oh, wait a second, he's 5.
Yeah, I know. Aren't they amazing? They're such
Yeah.
Children are so incredibly smart.
Yeah.
And I do think this is one thing I've had a lot of readers come to me and say, I identified with your story, your struggles, your triumphs and your struggles. But they also, one of the things that they say to me is that they think about their parenting differently. And a lot of friends, obviously, some have divorced and they're co-parenting with the other parent. And I think some people see that the mistakes that my parents made and they learn from it. And that's, I think, a magical outcome of this book as well, is that people are rethinking some of the things that they're doing in their own homes based on what my takeaway was as a child.
What are some of those things, if you get into more details, that people came to you and like, oh, I can't believe I'm doing this to my kid. I'm going to change this. What are some of those things?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, that it's a general theme in that what we're saying, kids are so smart. Mm-hmm. And that even though we weren't talking about it openly in my house, I knew. It's almost like when the parents go to the bedroom and they're like, we're going to have a conversation. And the kids know, oh, they're having a disagreement behind a closed door in the bedroom. It's around how astute and how feeling kids are. And that I think some readers have been inspired to be more open with their kids, not about family secrets or things that are not age appropriate, but more about if there's something going on in the home, the kids can feel it. And you do deserve the space to tell them to the correct degree what is going on in the home. I do have one friend who reached out, and they have a somewhat acrimonious divorce, and the finances became a big thing, a big point of tension between the two adults. Mm-hmm. And my friend said, I read your story and how when that became part of your parents' divorce, you felt that I felt like as if my wings had been clipped. I had wanted to continue going to get my master's, and my parents eventually just kind of said, we're done with you. We're going to fight about money between the two of us. And that was a really isolating feeling for me and really painful, because I did need their help, and they basically kind of both turned their backs on me because they were fighting about money. And so it's things like that where I think people just kind of rethink their approach to what might be sometimes tension between adults and how the kids take it in.
Do you think your mother feels like she found her voice through you?
Oh, that gave me chills. That's a beautiful question. I think, yes. Shame robbed my mom of her voice for a very long time. She was ashamed she was an orphan. She was ashamed she was a mother that relinquished. And I think, and then, the other big layer of her shame was when my father no longer wanted to be married to her. And I think it took me a long time to get her to see it, but she now sees the power in her story and how she's a hero.
Wow. That gives me chills.
But she is the hero. She really is. And I'm incredibly proud of her, because most people would have stopped trying to have what she wanted, a family. And that was what she wanted. She wanted the house and the family. And while it did go sideways, she did have it. And she is the hero of her story. And I think she now sees it. And I think she also sees that she's giving voice to the millions of women, and it's millions of women, wow, young girls that were forced to relinquish their children under societal pressure. They were shamed. They were told, your baby deserves a family. You are not deserving of raising this child. And I think for my mom to put a stake in the ground and say, and this is how she words it, I did not like what they did to us. And to put a stake in the ground and to say it was wrong, and to do that on behalf of a lot of women who have never told their story, I think she likes that.
Beautiful.
And I like it for her. I do. I do. And I like how empowered she feels now, when I think many times in her life she was powerless.
And how did it heal your relationship with her?
Well, it's been complicated.
It's always complicated with moms. Yeah, of course.
It is. That mother-daughter relationship. I mean, boy, yeah, you could, I mean, there's millions of books written about it, and there will be for the end of time.
For the rest of eternity.
The rest of eternity. I think, so when I was writing it, my mom and I have always been close in a way. And I think in many ways I was mothering her a lot of my life, because I saw she was so stuck.
I understand that that's a heavy burden to take on, to become your mother's mother. It's not yours. Like, just recently, well, it's not recently. I guess in the last 2-3 years, I'm putting more boundaries around my giving, or what I'm giving up for my loved ones, and especially like boundaries and emotional boundaries with my mom. And it's healthier for me. It's not, because right now I'm like, I don't need to be anyone. Like, I'm always going to be there for my family, for my mom. I don't need to be her mother. I am a mother. I have one child right now, hopefully, God willing, more in the future. But right now, I'm my son's mom. That's it. Until he's 18, they say until 13, they're still in your aura, and then it kind of like grow up a little bit, and then 18, of course, they're their own person. But right now, I am my son's mother. I'm not my mother's mother, and it's easy for me to get into, because I want the best for her, and sometimes she doesn't make the right decisions the way I think they should be, and it's really nice to be powerful and controlling sometimes. But I'm in the process of letting go of that, as much as possible, because it's not healthy for anyone. And just that understanding that I do not need to take on that burden, for me is like, it's a weight off of my shoulders. I can always be love, help, whatever. I'm a really good daughter, but I don't need to take on this emotional heaviness as well. It's not my responsibility. Every person that came here on this earth, it came for their own soul correction, to go through their own journey. Yeah, and sometimes when you help too much, you just get in the way. They need to go through their own stuff, even my child. It's easier said than done, but I'm working on it.
I'm working on it too. I have a question. What inspired you? Was there something that brought you to this level of awareness that you needed to do that for yourself?
I don't know. I'm always I always learn and evolve and analyze, and I work with coaches. I did a lot of personal self-development work. I just spoke with like 407 amazing people, or maybe 10 by now, on this podcast. So I keep learning. I don't know where the inspiration came from exactly. Maybe it's a coach I worked with. I don't know, but it's just it's intuition, and I guess God's guidance. And as we grow, we see things differently. And if we're interested, we take a deep dive into our own magnificent world, and we recreate ourselves in a different way.
Yes. And I feel like I'm still doing this work. And I think it's going to be my whole life that I'm struggling with this balance that you talk about, of over nurturing, not mothering myself enough. That's something that I've learned that I do. I overextend myself to other people's emotions, and because I was doing that ever since I was a young girl, I could see that my mother was, as I said earlier, stuck, and that she didn't have any fight left in her. And in my book, I explain how rage became my companion when I was a teenager. And rage is a very misguided emotion and can get you in lots of trouble.
Like what trouble?
Well, I just, once my once this moment happened and my house kind of transformed, and I just became lost and wayward. And to your earlier question where you said, what were you like before and what were you like afterwards? I had just lost all feeling and all level of respect for myself.
You needed the rage to feel something.
I
You needed extreme to like to feel alive. I get
exactly. And so that the result was I was a very good student. My grades went off went off the cliff. I was involved in a car accident. That was probably my most shameful moment in my life. And the hardest part of my audiobook to read, because I was, I was right there. My audiobook just came out, and it was, what a fascinating journey it is to read, which is really acting your book out for people to listen to. But that was the scene. I could not get through that chapter. It took me a really long time, because as a woman and mother now, I look back at that young girl and I can feel how lost I was and how abandoned I felt. And there is a saying that the abandoned become the abandoners. And I think that's very true of my mom, is that she abandoned me emotionally when the house of cards fell down. And I'm not mad about it anymore. I was getting to like how my relationship has evolved with my mom. When I was writing the book, I had a lot of angry moments, disappointed, just a whole range of emotions. But then when I got through it and I really understood what it was like to live my mom's life, when I call it zip myself into her skin, and I told her story from first person, I embodied everything I could about my mom's life. I had tremendous empathy for her. And on the other side of forgiveness is love and acceptance. And I can still not like what happened. And I can regret the years that I lost.
And mourn them.
And mourn them. And mourn that young girl who was in the back of a police car with her hands behind her back, having done a horrible thing in the middle of her small town. I mean, it was out of a movie. I had the accident, and I lived in a small town, and the whole community was standing around me, watching me have my terrible moment. But your breakdown is your breakthrough. And I was determined from that moment on to not let what was happening around me take me down the way it was. Now, it took me a long time to get out of it, but I think we all have those kind of breakdown moments. I call them the bathroom floor moments, where you're on the bathroom floor and you're like, okay, no more of this, right? Whatever this is. And so through writing my story and sharing it with the world, my relationship with my mom has evolved in a big way. And what I think your listeners will find interesting is when she finally read the book, I thought she would always be upset about me writing her story for her. She was not upset about that. She was upset about my take on my life, which is very telling and very interesting. And I think that complicated dynamic that we talk about with mothers and daughters is that a mother and a daughter are never going to walk away from that. The young years of their relationship they're never going to walk away from it with the same perspective. And I think that's something that's like the risk of parenting, right? You do your best, but you don't know what their memory is going to do with.
I know. I keep reminding myself that it's okay and they don't have to be perfect, because I cannot be, even when I think I want to be, I'm not perfect, okay?
Who wants to be perfect? That doesn't sound fun.
Who wants to be perfect? But even when I'm, I have sometimes this guilt of like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or I should have treated him better. I should have done this or this and that, or oh my God, look at that mom's lunchbox. Mine should have been more nutrient and not just peanut butter and jelly. It's like, the little things. It's the little things. But if I'm doing my best, and I'm conscious, and I continuously learning, and I continuously doing the best I can, and that's all I can do at any given moment. And I have great intention of being a phenomenal mom, and I'm doing a lot for my son, and it's all perfect. Like my mom says that even if it's not perfect, it's perfect. So it's like perfect imperfection. Even if something is not perfect, it is still perfect. So just let go of the trying to control and be that bizarre image of a parent that you see on Instagram. Like those mom that cook like this perfect meal wearing Gucci and Louis Vuitton. Like, I'm like, seriously? That's not real.
That's not real at all. And I
No.
actually don't think I want to hang out with that person. I don't, I love the perfect.
I might want to have their suit, like the Gucci thing. Yeah.
Maybe I can have their closet and they can cook for me. But I think you make a great point. And then I was obviously listening to your podcast and the one with Christine Hassler, where I think one of the most important things as parents is this notion of rebuilding, because we are going to make mistakes. And what do we do after the mistake?
Yes.
And it's an advice I received a long time ago, where the importance of parents apologizing to their children and saying, I was wrong.
I do that a lot.
Right? It's such a magic sauce.
Right. And sometimes I do it and I'm like, wow, I'm apologizing again. But I'm looking at my little one. He's so forgiving. I'm like, wow. They're such bright lights. They're full of love. Their hearts is full of love. They forgive so much. They forgive us more than we forgive ourselves. Just like you did with your mom.
They do. And look, this is a lifelong journey. Some people have bigger hills to climb in this category. Some don't, right? Some have, I never want to say I use trauma a lot, but there are varying degrees of trauma, right? And there's some trauma out there that is just, we can't even comprehend. And I'm not obviously saying I'm an expert in any of that. I'm not, but, I just think the power of forgiveness is love and acceptance, like I said earlier. And that's something that I feel genuinely for both of my parents after going through this exercise, which is something I encourage people to do, is even if it's minor reflections or questions that you ask your mom or your dad if they're still with us, or even just writing down, well, what do you think it was like to be them? There is a universal truth that if you really want to get to know somebody, ask them about their mother, because we are all born from a mother, but very few of us really understand the woman that they were before they became our mom. And I really encourage people to try and figure that out, because it is such a roadmap to who you are and the things that make you great, the things that perhaps you have to overcome. But it's such a healthy exercise to do, because like I mentioned, I have tremendous empathy for both of my parents, even though they made giant mistakes in raising me, huge ones. They also did some things really well. And I think the roadmap to our own life and to where we're heading is, first, you got to look back and you got to say, okay, where do I come from? Who were the people that were raising me? And obviously mothers and fathers come in varying forms, and, the setup can be varying. But if we want to know where we're going, first look back and say, okay, where do I come from? And that just makes the road ahead, I think, so much clearer. And I'm not sure we're always encouraged to do that. I think there's a lot of people who are interested in doing that, but I'm not sure that's always been part of the family conversation, is tell me about your life, mom, dad, tell me who you are.
I love that. I always ask my mom about her life, because I've been to a seminar. I don't know if it was Brendan Burchard or I can't remember. I've been to so many, where they talked about like just taking a video camera and asking your mom all the questions that you want to ask, and I did that a few years ago. And for my mom, it felt a little ominous, like I'm going to die and this is my heritage. Thank God. But,
This is my final
but
documentation. Exactly. But
yeah, no, but it's not. It's not. Um, uh, but it's actually good. My mom is very closed off. She doesn't talk about some events in her past, but slowly but surely, sometimes I get like little glimpses into this and that, and I think as I am evolving and developing, of course, in on a quantum level, it affects her field, and I see that she's evolving as well. Everybody around me is evolving when I'm evolving. We are all connected. My field affects everyone, not only in my close family, but around the world. So the more work I do on myself, the more I can help heal them and heal the world. I want to ask about your healing journey. What kind of things did you do to heal? What did you go learn, or who did you talk to?
there were a lot of things that really helped me put myself back together. And I'll list them. First, one of them was, well, I suffered from an eating disorder for years, and that's just deeply connected to control and perfectionism and those things that I was trying to fix. And one of the first things that I did is I started to move. I started to walk, and then I started to run. And running became my religion. It became the thing that it took that negative voice in my head and it silenced her. And it actually, the voice started to change and it started to become, you are powerful and you are strong. And so running really saved my life. Music saved my life. I love music. I listen to music all day long. I love all kinds. I think music is very healing. And that was another thing. Books, reading, again, getting to this connectivity that we all have to each other, sharing our narratives. We don't feel as alone. We can see ourselves in other people's stories. That's the magic of life, right? So books were a big part of my healing journey. And then in the book, I do talk about my relationship with my therapist, Susan, and how eye-opening that was, and what a wonderful thing that was for me to be able to see that and to have somebody validate that what happened to me was not right. And sometimes we don't give ourselves that. And sometimes we just need somebody else to validate, like, I hear you, and no, you didn't deserve that. You deserved better. And that, I think, for me, therapy is a multi-layered cake. I think that was a very important moment. And then the other thing my way to healing, I failed all the time. I failed at relationships and I dated bad guys and I made lots of mistakes. But the difference was, as I matured, 20s, 30s to 40s, I no longer saw my mistakes as something wrong with me. I saw them as lessons. And I didn't, when I made a mistake, I think the thing that I ended up doing over time was not punishing myself for making it. Whereas before, if I made mistakes, I would punish myself in big, big ways.
Phenomenal. So I kind of like wrote it down. So what you said was running and getting in flow state. So you were running, your body was releasing endorphins, you were getting in some kind of flow state. And when you're in such an expanded state, there was a place for like intuition, God energy, inspiration to come and actually show you who you really are. And the conversation in your head started to change. And then you listen to music. Music is very healing. You read books, you educate yourself, you put intention on healing. You went to therapy. Let me say it again.
Therapy.
Therapy.
I went to therapy. I actually like that better. Therapy.
You went to therapy with Susan, and so she was your mirror, and she reflected back to you that you deserve better, and you're okay, and you deserve to be loved. So it's almost like she gave you permission to love yourself more. And then you got into a point where instead of shame, you embraced the lesson and became more self-accepting of yourself. And self-acceptance is phenomenal. It's where you go and you create magical things.
Yeah. And I started to see that my mistakes or not, they were like a coat of armor. And that one of the things, I study professional athletes. That's one of my things that I do. And, Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and, I'll study all of them and their mindset. And one of the things that professional athletes, I am obsessed with the story behind the athlete, not necessarily the athletics itself, but how they become great. And universally, athletes know that you have to fail to succeed. And they know that they are going to miss, a huge percentage of shots in order to be great. And when you change that paradigm shift on your life, and I'm not saying go out there and make mistakes and be reckless, but see the lesson in it and know that that's actually what makes you who you are. And that's the ascent that I was saying earlier. I think we get so obsessed with the view from the top and that it has to look a certain way. And it's really the climb. That's where the grit and the passion live, is in the ascent to the top, whatever that is.
Absolutely. I agree. It took me a while to understand that it's about the journey and not the accomplishment. The accomplishments are great, but I mean, how long do we celebrate our accomplishments for? A day, a month, few months, a year, 2 year? And then we're on to the next thing. It's all about the journey. It's not about the moment. When I get to the top, then I'm gonna dance and be happy. Be happy now. And just like life, like you said with your dad, when your dad said, went so fast, I wish I did more. Like every day matters.
Every day matters. And the one thing I'll also say that he said to me is, I said to him, we knew when he was going to die, and I said to him, well, what do you want me to tell my son about what it means to be a man? Because my son was the only grandson that he had. The rest, he had women all around him. That was a karma wheel getting my dad back. But I said, what do you want me to tell Drake, my son, about being a man? And my dad said, when they knock you down, keep getting up until you can't get up anymore.
Wow.
And when he said that, I looked at him and I thought, that's exactly who you are, Dad. You just keep getting up. I see the world trying to knock you down, but you just keep getting up. My mom was the same way. And I think that's one of the reasons that this story resonates with people, is there is extraordinary greatness in ordinary lives.
Yes. Beautiful. So if you had to give us 3 top tips to living a stellar life, what would they be?
Stellar life. Be honest. Look for the truth, even if it's uncomfortable. Celebrate that truth. Number 2, find your purpose, your why. And whatever that is, something that's going to fill you up. And if you don't think you have time for it, you do. I learned this from Mel Robbins. Do it for 15 minutes. Do it for 15 minutes a day. 15 minutes of inspired work towards something that you know will fulfill your life's purpose. Because to my dad's point, it goes fast. And then 3 is share your narrative. There's lots of different ways to do it. A memoir doesn't necessarily have to be it, but share your story, because your story matters and we all have a story to tell. And when we start sharing them like you and I have today, we are now connected. I now understand you better, and we might be thousands and thousands of miles away, but you and I are now connected.
I feel like we're so close right now. Like I can just hand you a cup of tea.
Exactly. And I would love that. And I could still talk to you for hours. And I think that's the element of the human experience that really matters, is being connected. And then that connection, we have community. And I think we need it now more than ever, obviously, for lots of different reasons.
Yes, and where can people find you, learn from you, get the book, all the good stuff?
So it turns out there's a lot of Jennifer Griffiths in the world. So my website and my handle is by Jennifer Griffith. So BY Jennifer Griffith. My book is available wherever books are sold, both sides of then. I will tell you, for people who are reading it, they read it in 2 days. So it took me 5 years to write, but I guess it's a page turner. That's the feedback. I wrote the book that I love to read. So I just, I wanted it to be something that people couldn't put down. And, yeah, so I would love for people to read it. I also just launched the audiobook, so that's available as well if people aren't into reading, which seems to be kind of common these days.
Phenomenal. Congratulations on all of that. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing from your heart. And thank you for being a voice for yourself, for your mother, for other moms out there. Really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and I love what you're doing, and thank you for having me. That was a beautiful hour.
Awesome. And thank you, listeners. Remember to be honest. Find your why. Share your story because it matters. You matter. Remember, you matter. Have a stellar life. This is Orion. Till next time.